Now, back in 2015, the government set up an independent review of the laws governing small amount credit contracts. At the end of last year, it backed most of the recommendations contained in the final report. Kelly O'Dwyer was the federal minister responsible at the time. She's now the Minister for Revenue and Financial Services, and she joined me from Canberra. Kelly O'Dwyer, thank you for joining Lateline.
Great pleasure to be with you, Jeremy.
Did ASIC stuff up by limiting the scope of its investigation?
Well, ASIC actually had a very good result for the investigation it conducted into the online payments that were made by cash converters to people who had taken out small amount credit contracts. In fact, the penalty was very significant. It was around about $12 million overall. It affected around 55,000 customers who had small amount credit contracts. It meant that they got redress of over $10.8 million, and they had the additional penalty on top to basically say to cash converters that they had done the wrong thing and they had breached their responsible lending provisions under the Credit Act.
Well, yes, it is a good outcome for those who did get an outcome, did get some compensation from this investigation, but there is a great number of people, perhaps in the thousands, who've been left out.
So for the people who have obviously gone into a cash converters, if they feel that there has been a problem in the way that they have been dealt with, that there has been a breach of the responsible lending provisions, of course they can make a complaint to ASIC, and there is absolutely nothing stopping ASIC from being able to conduct an investigation. The government has provided ASIC with more than $121 million to conduct enforcement actions and investigations to enhance their capability right across the board. So they certainly have the capacity to do it, and individuals can today go to the Credit and Investment Ombudsman to seek redress if they require it.
There are some very serious limits on that capacity to investigate, though, because ASIC has also signed this release with that enforceable undertaking against cash converters that it would not take any further action for those customers who were affected before November 2016.
Well, my understanding is that that relates to the online customers. My understanding is that there'd be nothing to preclude them looking more broadly if there are systemic issues more broadly. The regulator is not prohibited in going about their business as a regulator, but as I said, those people who currently feel that they require redress can go to the Credit and Investment Ombudsman and get that redress today.
Is it realistic to tell those people, some of the most vulnerable in society, to say, go to the Ombudsman, compile your own documentation and see how you go through that avenue, because ASIC can't necessarily act for you because of this release it's signed with cash converters?
Well, I don't accept the proposition that they can't investigate. As I said to you, my understanding is that that only relates to online payments. So I don't accept that proposition. However, I would say to you that the government has conducted a very extensive report, as were our obligations under the National Consumer Credit Protection Act. We have independently looked at small amount credit contracts. We believe that further changes need to be made to the Act. The government has announced that we are going to make further changes to the Act this year in legislation to provide an even brighter line test so that vulnerable consumers who are being induced into these small amount credit contracts, who don't necessarily have the capacity to repay and who get themselves into a debt spiral, don't find themselves in that position because people have acted unscrupulously.
Indeed, you've had those recommendations from that report since early last year. You were consulting until late last year, and you personally backed those recommendations.
Correct.
So why the delay now in enforcing it through legislation?
Well, there's no delay. The legislation is being drafted as we speak, and as soon as that's ready to be brought into the Parliament, we will do that at the earliest opportunity. We believe it's critically important that these changes be implemented. It's important not only for people who take out small amount consumer credit contracts, but it's also important for people who have arrangements with consumer leasing as well, which has previously been left out entirely. And the vast bulk of people who, for instance, take out consumer leases are people who are receiving Centrelink payments, some of the most vulnerable people in our community who have been charged interest rates of upwards of around 300% on a leased product. And that's simply not right.
So how long before that legislation comes through?
As I said to you, it's going to be brought in this year at the earliest opportunity, and it will pass this year with the support, I'm sure, of both Labor, the Greens and the crossbench.
Tell me, what are the industry saying to you? Some of these recommendations cover the notions of affordability, suitability, the capping of fees and making unsolicited offers to people who may be vulnerable. Some in the industry are saying that this will send payday lenders to the wall.
Well, we don't accept that, and that was not the findings of the independent review. There are some people, obviously, who won't fit within the scope of the changes. They're the people who are probably acting at the margins and who are perhaps engaging in practices that are putting vulnerable people at further risk. The government doesn't make an apology for that, but there are a vast number of people who do operate within the law. We're tightening the law. We're making sure that it works for vulnerable people in our community who don't always have great access to finance products and who would otherwise be taken advantage of.
Can I take you